I have spent 40 years watching people arrive at the gate of this monastery with something urgent in their eyes. They come carrying the weight of everything they have accumulated, opinions, ambitions, wounds, identities, and they set it all down at the threshold, with the relief of someone finally putting down a very heavy stone. I have seen this hundreds of times, and I have seen what happens next, which is almost always surprising to them. What happens next is not the peace they expected. What happens is that they notice for the first time how much of the weight they carried was not the world's, but their own. I know this because I was one of them. I arrived here at 25 with 2 bags and the absolute certainty that I was making a terrible mistake. My mother had pressed her forehead against mine the morning I left, and my father had stood 3 feet away, with his arms at his sides in that particular stillness that men of his generation used when they did not know what to do with feeling. My younger sister had said nothing at all, which was the thing that stayed with me longest. I walked away from all of them on a Tuesday morning in September, when the air had just begun to carry the first suggestion of cold, and I did not stop walking until I reached a gate, not unlike the one these visitors pass through now. I did not feel peace when I walked through it. I felt loss in a way I had no language for yet. The loss of the life I was supposed to live. The loss of the version of Yang who would have married and built and accumulated and arrived at old age, surrounded by the evidence of his choices. I grieved that man for years. This is something I do not think people understand about renunciation. It is not the absence of grief. It is grief taken all the way through. For the first decade, here I was, I think, the most difficult student my teacher had ever encountered. Not because I was rebellious, because I was so desperate to get it right. I would sit in meditation for hours beyond what was asked, certain that if I simply applied enough effort, enough discipline, enough of the quality that had served me in the world, understanding would come. My teacher, an old man with a face like weathered wood, would watch me return from these sessions, hollow-eyed and satisfied with my suffering, and he would say nothing. For months he said nothing. Then one morning he handed me a broom and told me to sweep the lower courtyard. I swept it thoroughly and returned feeling I had passed some kind of test. He looked at the courtyard and then at me and said, "You swept it as though sweeping were something to be finished." I did not understand what he meant for another 5 years. You sweep it the way you live it, not to finish, not to achieve, simply to sweep. I have thought about my family during all of these years with a frequency that surprised me. The tradition I entered does not forbid such thinking, but the culture around it sometimes suggests that genuine practice means the mind becomes still. Attachment falls away, and the faces of those we left recede into something like serenity. This was not my experience. My mother's face arrived in the early mornings for years, not as haunting, simply as fact. She was a person who had planned a certain life for her son, and her son had walked away from it in September, and both of these things were true and neither of them resolved. I wrote to her once a year for the first 15 years, and she wrote back letters that were careful in a way that told me everything. She was protecting both of us from the conversation we were not having. When she died, I was not with her. I learned of it 3 weeks later by letter. I sat with this for a long time. I'm sitting with it still. This is another thing renunciation teaches you, if you let it, that some losses do not resolve. They settle. There is a difference. What I gained is harder to describe than what I lost, because what I lost has shape and name, a family's daily life, a version of myself, a particular future. What I gained is more like an absence, the absence of a certain kind of suffering. I had spent 25 years before this gate in a condition I did not recognize as suffering, because it was simply the texture of being alive, the constant negotiation between who I was and who I was supposed to be, the low hum of wanting things to be different from what they were, the particular exhaustion of maintaining a self that needed to be maintained. When that fell away, not immediately, not for years, but gradually, like sediment clearing from water, what remained was something I can only call ordinary. I mean this as the highest praise. The days became ordinary in the way that bread is ordinary, simple, sufficient, more than enough. I want to be honest with you, as I am honest with the visitors who sit across from me now. I do not know if I would make the same choice today. This is a strange thing to admit after 40 years, but I think it is true. The person who walked through that gate was running toward something, but also away, and some of what he was running from could have been faced, could have been stayed with. There are forms of practice available in the middle of an ordinary life, a family, a house, the grinding ordinary love of showing up for people you have chosen, that contain their own profound teachings. My teacher told me once that the monastery is useful for some people and unnecessary for others, and harmful for a few, and that knowing which category you belong to is itself a kind of wisdom. I believe this. I also believe that I could not have known at 25. The young are often making the only choice available to them, which is the choice that matches the self they have not yet seen past. What I would say to the version of myself standing at that gate, or to you, if you are standing at some gate of your own, some threshold between one life and another, is this: the leaving changes you, but it does not resolve the questions you are carrying. The questions come with you. I carried my fear of being ordinary all the way into a life of extraordinary simplicity, and found it waiting for me in the meditation hall, in the broom, in the blank face of a morning that asked nothing of me, and therefore asked everything. The questions are not out there. They were never out there. This is not a reason not to leave. Sometimes leaving is exactly right. But it helps to know that whatever you are walking toward will ask the same things of you that whatever you are walking away from was already asking. The territory changes. The traveler remains. 40 years. My sister visited once about a decade ago. She had grown into a woman I did not fully recognize, which is to say she had simply continued becoming herself while I had been here, becoming mine. We sat in the courtyard, where I had once swept badly, and we drank tea, and she said, after a long silence, "Are you happy?" I held the question. It is not a simple question, despite sounding like one. I said, "I am at peace," which is different from happy, but in some ways more durable. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "I think I understand that." And I believe she did. We sat together for another hour without speaking much, and when she left I watched her walk through the gate in the opposite direction from the one I had walked 40 years earlier, back into the world that had continued without me. And I felt something that was not grief and not relief, but something in between. Recognition, perhaps, of all that we both carried, and gratitude that we had been able to set it down for an hour and simply drink tea. This is what I have learned, if I have learned anything. The present moment does not require justification. The choice you made does not require vindication. The life you did not live does not require mourning, though you may mourn it, and the mourning is not failure. You are always, in some sense, walking away from one gate and toward another, and the question is not whether the walking is worth it, but whether you are present for the journey you have actually taken. I have taken mine. I am still taking it. My teacher's face joins my mother's in the early mornings now, both of them gone, both of them somehow present, and the courtyard outside still needs sweeping. And this morning, as every morning, I pick up the broom and I begin.